Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. Today I have a weekly reading report for Sunday, July 13th. Now I'm recording this and uploading it on the 14th, but we're going to say it's for yesterday. So what I want to do is I do want to talk about the books that I'm either currently reading or I completed this past week. Then I want to talk about books that I'm planning on reading for the rest of this week, as well as the rest of the month. And also, since these weekly reading reports in theory are going to be hopefully a little bit shorter than my monthly videos, I do want to start talking about, since this is called Joe's Book and Movie Corner, I want to talk about the movies that I watched as well. So I'll kind of close with that. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about what I have been reading this week. So the first thing is, if I can find it, I am just continuing on with slowly reading and I'm doing this out loud. I've been slowly reading Homer's The Odyssey, translated by Robert Fagles. I've only made it through book 4. I have been anxiously awaiting the appearance of Odysseus, and I think in book 5, which is titled, if I can find it, Odysseus. So book 5 is called Odysseus, Nymph, and Shipwreck. So I think I'm going to get my wish. The first four books are all about his son Telemachus, and he's kind of trying to find news around Greece, news about his father. So the next time I pick this up, my wish is going to be fulfilled, I think. So I am enjoying it, but so far I'm liking the Iliad better. I read that last year, same translator, Robert Fagles, and I really, really loved it. But we're going to continue on with this. I am enjoying this. A book that I did complete was my entry. So in week 1 of Rocket Summer, created by Michael K. Vaughan, I was reading The Moon Pool by Abraham Merritt. Now that book was also the book for Roger's Cheap Book Club, also created by Michael K. Vaughan. I think he picked that book to kind of overlap with the first week of Rocket Summer. It was written in 1919, so it fits within the week 1 requirement of read something from the 1930s or earlier, so something from the pulp era of science fiction. And I'm going to echo some of what I said last week. I'm glad that I read the book. I appreciated it. I can see that Abraham Merritt has a lot of imagination. I can see he was an influence on H.P. Lovecraft. But I had trouble really engaging with it. And I think one of the main problems was the prose. Abraham Merritt, he just seems to kind of he likes to go on a little bit in his descriptions, and sometimes it's just hard to stay focused when reading him, and it's hard to just kind of stay in tune with the book, and the book had trouble clicking with me. It was very imaginative. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's kind of a Lost World story. It's these characters go down into this subterranean kind of fantasy world, and they have an adventure there. It's also kind of a portal fantasy story as well. But it also, it brings up an interesting question. Last week, I mentioned that I thought that this story it is firmly science fiction with fantasy elements. I was about 70% of the way through with the book when I said that. Now I think I want to reverse that. I think it's a fantasy story first and foremost with heavy science fiction elements. A lot of the things that you see in the book, with this kind of technologically advanced subterranean culture, a lot of what you see can be explained by science. The narrator, Dr. Goodwin, specifically mentions that, everything, even if it seems like magic, it is based on science. It's technology. And in fact, one of my favorite aspects of the book is sometimes the narrator will start describing a technology and how he thinks it works, and then it will be redacted from the text with a footnote saying, we don't want the Russians to learn how this stuff is made, so we've edited it out. So that was really, really cool. So I appreciate that there is a lot of this idea kind of persists through the novel. All this stuff is explainable until it isn't. There is kind of in the last quarter of the book, these kind of godlike beings show up. Kind of the nature of this subterranean world is you get a little bit more about it, and you learn more about its history. And at this point, the narrator goes, okay, I know I've said everything's explained by science. Maybe there's some magic here. So ultimately, I think at its core, it is fantasy. And also, there's kind of this really great, and I did like this this part. There's this kind of fantasy battle that happens at the end, which I thought was pretty well done. Another aspect that made this book kind of tough to get into and it caused it not to click with me is the characters are pretty thin. Dr. Goodwin is the narrator, but he's not even really the hero of the story. The hero is his compatriot Larry O'Keefe. But Larry O'Keefe is kind of a thin character, and everyone's just kind of... There's not much to these characters. I have heard that Abraham Merritt's writing does get better as he goes on. This is I think his first novel that he wrote. So I do want to read more of this author, even though this book didn't really click with me. But I am glad I read it. And if you're getting into science fiction, and if you watched my last video, I have a huge TBR list of science fiction. I want to read more of the pulp era. Then I want to hit the golden era, and then I want to read into the new wave era in kind of the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I also want to read kind of pulp fantasy. And it makes you think, all right, how different are science fiction and fantasy really? Michael K. Vaughan actually made a video recently about this. I've been watching a lot of Outlaw Booksellers videos, and both of them say, no, these are different genres. And I agree with that. These are different genres. But when you read The Moonpool, you go, are they really? There's a big overlap. And it just makes you think, all right, in this pulp era, science fiction, fantasy, it's this kind of this Venn diagram. There is some overlap. And the further you go back in time to the pulp era, those circles in that Venn diagram kind of move closer together. So science fiction, I do consider it is a totally different genre than fantasy. But both those genres are subgenres of a broader, speculative fiction, fantastic fiction, broader fantasy umbrella genre. So if we're still having arguments today about is it fantasy or is it science fiction? If we're having that argument, even though some books are clearly, this is firmly fantasy, this is firmly science fiction, there are still works, I think, out there that you could make the argument either or. So if you can make that argument and if you can have that debate, ultimately they're a part of one broader fantastic fiction genre. Anyways, just, my thinking may change as I read more science fiction and more fantasy, but that's kind of where I am now. As I read more science fiction, I will talk about what makes science fiction unique from fantasy. There's this whole idea of paradigm shifts and novums, new things. That's a topic maybe for another video. But I'm glad I read The Moonpool. Just continuing on with Rocket Summer for week 2. I was hoping to read some 1940s Robert Heinlein. I didn't get to it, so I didn't read a novel, but I was able to squeeze in a short story. So I read, just found it on Project Gutenberg, The Monster Maker by Ray Bradbury. And that was a story that was published in 1944 in Planet Stories magazine. Not a very long story. It's a short story. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's about I guess he's like a solar system patrolman. He's part of they call it the patrol, I think. And he's accompanied by a photographer that's kind of documenting, this patrolman as he's going about his job, and they're going to use it for training footage. And they kind of have to deal with this criminal organization that's operating on this asteroid. And they run into like these monsters that are on the asteroid that are protecting the criminal organization. And it was a lot of fun. Very short, to the point story. I had a lot of fun with it. And you could see, though it's not as broad in scope as Star Trek, you can see that stories like this are clearly an influence to things like Star Trek. And then lastly, I want to talk about, this is a book that I am still currently reading. This is Strangers from the Sky by Margaret Wander Bonanno. And I'm actually reading this as my very first group reads. This is, of course, for BookTrek 2025. So this was a group reads that was set up by Brandy at the Bookeclectic. We're reading this with a number of other booktubers. But this is a classic in Star Trek fiction, and I got to say, I'm really enjoying this. But it's interesting. If I had picked this up earlier in my Star Trek reading career, say like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I probably would not have liked it. I've mentioned before that when I read Star Trek novels, I just want a story that feels like an unaired episode. I don't want to see, aliens that are kind of wacky and strange, like you see in Diane Duane's novels, Spock's World and The Wounded Sky. I don't want to see the first adventure. Like, there's a book called Enterprise, The First Adventure by Vonda McIntyre. I don't want to see stuff that might be later contradicted by canon in a later series. And I don't want to see like characters that aren't part of the main cast. This book has, now it doesn't have wacky aliens in it, but it has characters that aren't part of the main cast, and it has earlier adventures of the Enterprise later in the book. So it doesn't check the boxes of what I want, but I'm finding that I'm becoming much more accepting of what I like in a Star Trek novel. So what is this about? It's actually pretty cool. So the beginning of the novel takes place in the 23rd century, in between the motion picture and the Wrath of Khan, and a work of alternative history, a book called Strangers from the Sky, just kind of shows up, and it's written by this woman, a historian that actually lives on Vulcan. So humanity can't immediately verify if it's true, and it's telling this alternate. So the book states that the history of first contact between Vulcans and humans, which also contradicts what we later see in First Contact. So there's that canon-breaking element that would have previously bothered me. So that the history of first contact between Vulcans and humans is actually incorrect, and Vulcans and humans met at an earlier time. And there's an even earlier first contact that this book within a book, Strangers from the Sky, is now going to reveal. And is it true? Is it a lie? We don't know. So one thing that this immediately reminded me of was one of my favorite books, The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. That's about kind of a book within a book, alternate history. Is it a parallel world? We don't know. So that kind of conspiratorial element to the book within a book is really interesting. One thing that may turn some readers off with this is, I mentioned the book within a book. There's the 23rd century section. There's even more stuff going on. The book follows non-main cast characters that are completely new. A lot of time is spent with new characters. And also, there's other time jumping that happens. So the story is very complex. It's kind of all over the place. I'm enjoying it, but some readers may find that it's just too all over the place for them. So might not be for everyone, but it's well regarded for a reason, I think, in Star Trek books. So I'm about 3/4 of the way through. Hopefully I should be able to finish it within the next day or so. And I'll talk about it again next week when I finish it and maybe give some more thoughts on it. So I'm really enjoying that. So next up, I want to talk about... so that's what I've read, what I have read, what I've completed, what I'm currently reading. And then I want to talk about kind of what I want to read this coming week. And also, for the rest of the month. So, of course, I'm going to finish Strangers from the Sky. And then for my next book in Rocket Summer for week 3, we move into the 1950s. You can watch my previous video where I go over this huge TBR, but I think what I'm going to do is read Arthur C. Clarke's Earthlight. I found this really nice mass market paperback copy. It's not a very long thing. Shouldn't take me more than a couple days to read, hopefully. The reason I want to read this is my dad... he was recently, I was visited by my parents, and we were talking about science fiction. My dad mentioned that he read this book when he was a teenager, and he really, really liked it. So I was luckily able to find it. I want to read this and be able to talk to him about it. For another BookTube event, this is an event that I'm not going to go too deep into. This is Private Eye July. I've mentioned in my last video, I want to read a short story or two out of this collection. This is the Continental Op by Dashiell Hammett. It's just a collection of Continental Op short stories. I want to read at least one or two from this book. I'm probably not going to be able to read the whole book this month, but I'll be able to get something in for Private Eye July. Another BookTube event I want to participate in is Jane Austen July. If I wasn't participating in so many BookTube events, I probably would read something like Mansfield Park. The only Jane Austen books I've read are Pride and Prejudice and Emma. I'm picking this instead of Mansfield Park. This is Northanger Abbey. The reason I'm picking this is I've heard it is lighter in tone. And it's just also a physically shorter book. So I've got all these other things I'm trying to fit into this month. Let me pick something that's a little easier reading and a little bit shorter. So I'm really excited to start this. I don't know if I'm going to get to this week. If I don't get to it this week, for sure I'm going to start it next week. And hopefully finish it by the end of July. And then lastly, this is a book. This is not for any reading event. This is just something that I've kind of had in the back of my mind that I want to read that I've never read before. In fact, maybe I should start a series. These are books that I should have read in high school or middle school. This is Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman. So I mentioned books that I should have read. Last month I read a book that is often assigned, but I was never assigned. I read Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Golding, right? I think that's the author. That was a book that just was never assigned to me, but it's kind of common to find it in assigned reading for high school. This is another book that I'm pretty sure many people have read it as required reading. It was never assigned for me. The reason I wanted to read it, so I picked this up a couple days ago. I was running an errand, and I stopped by my local used bookstore, and I saw it sitting on the shelf. A really handsome 20th century classic. I love these blue spine penguins. The reason I kind of wanted to read this was I'm currently rewatching Seinfeld, and in like season 3 and 4, when George Costanza loses his job and he's trying so hard to stay on unemployment, Jerry is constantly calling him Biff in reference to Death of a Salesman. So I want to understand that reference more. So maybe this week, maybe next week, certainly before the end of the month, I want to squeeze this in. So that's Death of a Salesman. So that's it for the books that I want to talk about, both things that I've read, things that I want to read. So if you're here just for the books, you can tune out now. Have a great week. We'll see you next weekend. But if you want to stick around for some movie talk, I want to talk about 3 movies that I watched this week. And 2 of them tie into BookTrek. So the first movie that I watched was Star Trek 2009, directed by J.J. Abrams. So I've never made a ranking video of Star Trek movies. I find Star Trek 09 to be a pretty good movie, but it's not my favorite Star Trek movie. I really enjoyed it this time. I still have certain problems with it. So the problems that I used to have, I used to be bothered by the differences between the Kelvin timeline and the Prime timeline. Like, why are these things so different? I've kind of let go of that. I mean, in the movie, Spock specifically states that this is an alternate reality. Our destinies have changed. Another thing I think I read recently, I read something, I think, from Simon Pegg. And he said, I think in his mind, he thinks that when Spock and the Romulan mining ship come through and destroy the Kelvin, and it branches off into a new timeline, that timeline also might go in the reverse direction in time. So maybe the past of the Kelvin timeline is a different past than the Prime timeline. And I thought that was kind of a really cool idea. There's nothing in the movie that says that. It's just kind of a fun thing to think about. Maybe it's headcanon territory. But I thought that was pretty cool. And that helped me just get over, don't get so hung up on all the differences. Like, when you're watching the movie, it's like, why is it so different from the Prime timeline? Just let go of it and enjoy the movie. One thing that does still bother me, though, is, and we're going to get a minor spoiler territory. If you've never seen the movie, what I'm about to say is not going to ruin it. Kirk eventually, they're all cadets. Spock is not, but Kirk and McCoy are still in the academy. And this big emergency happens. They're assigned to the new flagship. All these cadets are now, this is somewhat unbelievable. Why are these cadets going to the flagship? And as the story goes on, Kirk ends up finding his way into the captain's chair. Now he's a cadet. In the story, though, it does make some sense. What doesn't make sense is by the end of the movie, again, minor spoilers here, but it's not a big deal. By the end of the movie, after the story's over, it's Kirk is now he's the captain of the Enterprise. Why? He's still really a cadet. It doesn't make any sense. Another thing that used to bother me more, it bothers me more in the next movie. There's this whole idea of Kirk drift. Kirk popular culture at large kind of views James Kirk as more of a James Bond type figure, and he loves to bed women, and he's kind of sexist. And if you watch the original series, he's not really that at all. And in this timeline, he's more like that pop culture. What's the character's name from Futurama? In the comments, someone tell me. Zap Brannigan, I think. In the Kelvin timeline, he is much closer to the pop culture version of Kirk, where he's kind of more womanizing and he's a bad boy. The movie justifies it in that his past and his childhood in the Kelvin timeline is very different than the Prime Universe timeline. So it doesn't bother me that much. It bothers me more into the next movie I watched, which is Star Trek Into... Oh, by the way, before I talk about Star Trek Into Darkness, I will say Star Trek 09, even though I still have some problems with it, even though it's not the Prime timeline, if you're new to Star Trek, this is a great entry point for you. Just watch Star Trek 2009. You're going to have a fun time with it. Next up, I watched Star Trek Into Darkness, the sequel, also directed by J.J. Abrams. And while this movie, if I were to make a ranking of Star Trek movies, this one would be at the bottom. Not at the very bottom, but towards the bottom. I don't hate this movie as much as I used to. I still have a lot of problems with it. Why? If you're going to do... Well, if you've never seen this movie, I won't even say it. There's still some silliness with it. There's the whole tribble blood thing that just the big Deus Ex Machina at the end of the movie with the tribbles. It's copying a lot of Wrath of Khan. There's the whole, again, why is this young Kirk is still kind of this bad boy pop culture image of Kirk. There's a scene where he's having a threesome with two aliens, and it's like, okay, that's not James Kirk. At this point, he should have matured a little bit. So it kind of has the... I have a similar problem with the Daniel Craig James Bond movies, where this is the sequel to a reboot, but we're still in reboot territory, if that makes sense. It's the same problem with Quantum of Solace, the James Bond movie. We have to keep watching movies to finally get to where, okay, Kirk is finally the character we know from the original series. We want to see... We want a movie just to be a cinematic version of a Star Trek TOS episode, and we never quite get that. It's still like the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. It still feels like we're never quite there. We're never quite at the James Bond we know and love. We're never quite at the James Kirk we know and love. Having said that, the movie, it's a very good-looking movie. The plot has some head-scratching moments, but it's enjoyable enough. If you're not so familiar with Star Trek and you're just watching Star Trek 09, you probably will enjoy Star Trek Into Darkness. And the third movie I want to talk about, something a little different. I was in the mood to watch a Godzilla movie, so I watched 1984's The Return of Godzilla, directed by Koji Hashimoto. If you are unfamiliar with Godzilla, so the Godzilla movies have several different eras. There's the Showa era, which starts in the 50s and goes into the 70s. Then there's the Heisei era, which is the 80s and 90s. And there's the Millennium era, which starts in 99 with Godzilla 2000 and goes into the 2000s. And then the current era, which is anime movies and the most recent Godzilla Minus One. It's the... I should have looked this up. The Railway? I'll put an edit here, the title of the current era. Anyway, so Godzilla 1984, or The Return of Godzilla, also known as Godzilla 1985, confusingly. This is a direct sequel to the original Godzilla 1984, and it ignores all of the Showa era. So it's kind of doing what Halloween 2018 did. It's kind of like a legacy sequel, I guess. And in the Godzilla community, I think most people really like this movie. This is my second time watching it, and I have the same opinion that I had the first time I saw it a few years ago. I think it's overrated. I find this movie a bit dull. I think basically everything else, including Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, I enjoy everything else from the Heisei era more than this movie. Japan creates this aircraft. Excuse me. This aircraft called the Super X the Super X. And it's this futuristic aircraft that's designed to fight Godzilla should Godzilla ever return. And it's just kind of like this. I don't like the design of it. It's like this ugly slug-looking thing. It's piloted by a crew that we do see, but we never like get to know them. So it's basically the whole movie I find to be tensionless. I think every other Heisei movie does a better job and is more fun than this movie. So yeah, I think this movie is very overrated, but it's worth noting a lot of Godzilla fans really love it. But that's it for the movies that I watched. Yeah, that's all I have. Next weekend, I'm going to try to keep my updates. I'm going to try to upload them actually on the weekend on Sunday, so we are a day late here. But yeah, that's all for now. Thank you.